The billionaire's autistic son cried, "Nonstop in the restaurant," until a janitor did the unthinkable. The sound pierced through the elegant dining room like a siren, raw, desperate, the kind of crying that makes your chest tighten and your heart ache. Marcus Wellington III sat frozen in his chair, his perfectly pressed suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket as his 7-year-old son, Jamie, rocked back and forth, hands clamped over his ears, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. Around them, the whispers grew louder. The stares became more pointed. The clinking of silverware on fine china stopped altogether. Marcus had built an empire worth $3 billion, had negotiated with presidents and closed deals that changed industries. But in this moment, he was utterly, completely helpless. The afternoon had started with such promise. Marcus had canceled 3 meetings, something he never did, to take Jamie out for his favorite meal. It was supposed to be their special time together, just father and son. But somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, something had shifted. Maybe it was the sudden clatter of a dropped tray in the kitchen. Maybe it was the overwhelming sensory input of too many conversations happening at once. Whatever the trigger, Jamie had spiraled into a meltdown, and nothing Marcus did could pull him back. "Sir, perhaps it would be best if—" the restaurant manager approached with that particular expression Marcus had seen too many times, a mixture of pity and barely concealed irritation. The kind that said, "Your money is welcome here, but your problem is not." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He knew what came next. They'd done this dance in restaurants, movie theaters, and shopping malls across the city. The polite suggestions, the concerned looks, the inevitable request to leave. He reached for his wallet, ready to throw whatever money was needed to make this situation go away, even though he knew money couldn't fix this. Money couldn't make Jamie's world less overwhelming. Money couldn't build a bridge to his son's beautiful, complicated mind. "Please, just give me a minute," Marcus said, his voice cracking in a way that would have shocked his boardroom adversaries. He turned back to Jamie, whose cries had intensified. The boy's small hands were now covering his face, his whole body trembling. Marcus felt his own eyes burning with tears he couldn't shed, not here, not in front of all these people who were watching his failure as a father play out in real time. That's when everything changed. From the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed movement. A figure in a gray janitor's uniform had emerged from the kitchen area, pushing a mop bucket. The man was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and deep lines etched around his eyes. Instead of passing by like everyone else, he stopped. He stood there for a moment, watching Jamie with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Then, slowly, deliberately, the janitor set down his mop and walked toward their table. Marcus instinctively moved to shield his son, prepared to deflect yet another person who wanted them gone. But the janitor didn't speak to him. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of the expensive restaurant, crossing his legs and closing his eyes. And then he began to hum. It wasn't a song Marcus recognized. Maybe it wasn't a song at all. It was a low, rhythmic sound, steady as a heartbeat, gentle as waves on a shore. The janitor's weathered hands moved in slow, deliberate patterns in front of his chest, as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra. Around them, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Jamie's crying began to soften. His hands slowly lowered from his face. His rocking slowed. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his son's tear-filled eyes fixed on the janitor with laser focus. The old man never opened his eyes, never stopped humming, never broke the rhythm of his hands. Minutes passed. How many? Marcus couldn't say. Time had become elastic, meaningless. And then, miracle of miracles, Jamie slid down from his chair. Marcus started to reach for him, but something stopped him. He watched as his son, still hiccuping from his crying, walked over to the janitor and sat down on the floor in front of him. The old man opened his eyes then, and his face broke into the gentlest smile Marcus had ever seen. He shifted his position slightly, making room, and Jamie mirrored him. Crossing his own small legs, the janitor continued his humming, and Jamie, his beautiful boy who rarely made eye contact with anyone, looked right into the old man's eyes and began to hum too. The sound that came from Jamie's throat was off-key and uncertain at first, but it was there. It was real. It was communication. The janitor's hand movements slowed, and Jamie tried to copy them, his small hands trembling with effort and concentration. Together, they sat on the floor of that five-star restaurant, humming and moving their hands in a silent conversation that needed no words. Marcus felt his knees go weak. He slid into the booth, covering his face with his hands as tears finally came. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of something he couldn't even name. When he finally looked up, the janitor was helping Jamie to his feet. His son's face was calm now, peaceful in a way Marcus hadn't seen in weeks. "He'll be okay now," the janitor said softly, his voice carrying the warmth of 1,000 campfires. "Just needed someone to meet him where he was." "How did you—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. His voice wouldn't work. The old man smiled again, and Marcus noticed his eyes were glassy too. "My grandson. He's on the spectrum too. Taught me more about love and patience than I learned in 60 years before he came." He reached out and gently ruffled Jamie's hair. This little man just needed to know he wasn't alone in his storm. Marcus stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. "Please, let me—" "I want to thank you. I can write you a check, I can—" The janitor held up a hand, shaking his head. "No checks. No money." He glanced around at the other diners who were still watching, then back at Marcus. "But maybe you could do something for me. When you see another parent struggling with their kid in a store, in a park, wherever, don't look away. Don't judge. Just remember this moment and show them some kindness. That's the payment I want." Before Marcus could respond, the janitor picked up his mop and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Marcus standing there with his mouth open and his eyes wet. Jamie tugged on his father's sleeve, and when Marcus looked down, his son was making the hand movements the janitor had shown him, his face concentrated and calm. They didn't leave the restaurant. They finished their meal, with Jamie eating his pasta with more peace than Marcus had seen in months. The other diners eventually returned to their conversations, but Marcus noticed something had shifted. Several people smiled at them on their way out. One woman stopped to tell him his son was beautiful. The hostess, who had looked so uncomfortable earlier, brought Jamie a dessert on the house, shaped like his favorite dinosaur. That night, after Marcus tucked Jamie into bed and watched him fall asleep with those gentle hand movements still playing across his blanket, he sat in his home office and cried. Really cried. For the first time in years, he cried for all the moments he'd felt helpless. He cried for the gift a stranger in a janitor's uniform had given them both. And he cried because he realized that in a life spent accumulating wealth and power, he'd somehow forgotten the most valuable currency: human compassion. The next morning, Marcus did something else he'd never done. He tracked down the restaurant's staff records and learned the janitor's name was Thomas Rivera. He'd worked there for 12 years, never missed a day, and was planning to retire in 3 months. Marcus showed up at the restaurant before it opened and found Thomas in the break room. "I can't give you money," Marcus said, "but my company has a foundation. We fund autism research and support programs. I'd like to name a new initiative after your grandson. Programs that train people, teachers, first responders, service workers, how to help kids like Jamie when they're struggling. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Now that, he said, is a payment I can accept. 3 months later, the Rivera Initiative launched in 50 cities across the country. But more importantly, Marcus learned to sit on floors. He learned that his son didn't need a father who could buy him the world. He needed a father who would meet him where he was, in whatever storm he was weathering. And on the days when the world felt too loud and too bright for Jamie, Marcus would sit with him and hum, moving his hands in those gentle patterns, building bridges with patience and presence instead of power and money. Because sometimes the most valuable thing a billionaire can give isn't measured in dollars at all.